Breakfast with Bob.
Welcome to Breakfast with Bob. My name is Bob Babbitt. We're brought to you by the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix, Normatec, Form Goggles, UCAN, and our Challenged Athletes Foundation. We just sent out 3,921 grants totaling $5.9 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. Our next guest is a former president of the Florida and Miami Marlins, Mr. David Samson. How are you doing, David?
How are you, Bob? It's so good to see you. You look great.
You look awesome. I love the beard, buddy.
Well, I started something called the ML Beard Challenge, which is I'm not shaving until MLB has opening day, whenever that is.
Yes.
And for the first 100 days of the challenge, I'm giving away $1,000 a day to a different organization. For the first 77 days, I went through all the major league teams and all the NBA teams, and I gave in order to help people impacted by COVID-19, because there's so many seasonal workers and ancillary workers like bartenders and waiters and people on Broadway and just people who have been impacted so much. And then after George Floyd got murdered, starting on the 77th day, because life is a game of adjustments, and while COVID-19 is still ravaging the economy and impacting people, in day 77, Bob, I changed, and now each day I'm giving $1,000 to an organization who is basically helping with the racial inequality, helping figure out a way to cure this country of its systemic racism. So the beard continues, and charity continues. And Challenged Athletes Foundation actually was one of the recipients one of the days because of all the work I know that foundation does, that you know how much I love, and obviously you are Challenged Athletes Foundation. And so it's been an interesting couple of months.
So how did you get in? Were you a baseball player yourself? When did baseball come in your life?
I played baseball like any other kid, trying to have a catch with his dad, and that worked once in a while, and playing Little League. And I played freshman baseball. And then I realized in high school that I would have a far better chance of owning a team than playing on a team. And that's a tough day in any kid's life, because of course all I wanted to do is to be a player, a basketball player or a baseball player. But then I was on Wall Street, and I got a call from my stepfather at the time, who asked me to help him buy the Expos, to be a lawyer and a banker. I am a lawyer, and I worked on Wall Street, and I put together a deal, and that was going to be the end of my baseball involvement. And then he asked me to move to Montreal for 30 days and help run the team, and that turned into 18 years.
18 years with the Expos. So the Expos was what, 99 to 2002, executive vice president there, and that led to the Marlins.
So
how did that connect?
In 2002, we did a franchise swap that's never been done in the history of sport.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, we sold the Expos to Major League Baseball. We bought the Marlins from John Henry, who sold us the Marlins and then bought the Boston Red Sox. All of it happened at the same time.
Wow. And what did you learn from being outside of the inner circles of baseball to being with the Expos, and then with the Marlins, in terms of the business side of baseball?
Well, the reality is that I knew from the beginning that baseball was a business. And it's strange when you're in a private business that is really looked at as a public company, and you're in a private business where what you're selling is people's emotions. And I wanted people to engage with our team. And the problem when you've got clients who engage with your product on an emotional level, there are lots of ups and lots of downs. And I knew going in that that was different than, let's say, owning a widget company where you're selling widgets to either businesses or to consumers, where it's not much emotion. When you need to buy a light bulb, that's not an emotional purchase. When I'm producing light bulbs, there's nothing emotional about it. You need light. In sports, you're trying to get a connection with fans and get them to be anything other than apathetic. So I knew early on that I was running a business where I would be humbled every single day by people and their anger, frustration, but also providing lifetime memories for people. And that really attracted me to the business, and that's the part I love the most.
When I look at different sports, when I look at football, right? A town like Green Bay can compete with the New York Giants or the Chicago Bears because everybody gets the same amount, right, from television. With baseball, I look at, we're in San Diego, the Padres, or when you're with the Marlins or with the Expos, and you're trying to compete with the regional dollars that the Boston Red Sox are getting or the Yankees are getting. Is that possible? Obviously, you guys won a couple World Series, but is it possible on a regular basis to compete with on a level playing field with the bigger franchises?
So baseball tries to level that playing field with something called revenue sharing,
Yeah.
where revenue from larger market teams or larger revenue teams gets shared with markets who have less revenue. But the reality is, from a competitive standpoint, and I try to make this clear to fans, and I've tried for 18 years, and it's really hard. The main difference between a large revenue team and a small revenue team is the length of the competitive window that you have as a team to win. So just take the Marlins, for example. Yeah. We would put a team together knowing that we had a 2 to 5 year stretch with those players. And we needed to win with those players during that time. No matter what, we knew we couldn't keep the majority of the players into free agency. We wouldn't have the payroll capacity. So we'd have to turn over the team. And that became known as a fire sale, but it really, what it is, it's a market correction. And you know, when you run a small market team, that you're going to have those corrections every 4 to 5 to 7 years. And the key to being a successful executive is that you keep your window open as long as you can, and you keep the amount of time your window's closed as short as you can. The best executives can do that.
At the same time, while you're marketing these players. We want you as fans to love these players, knowing that in a few years, you're going to have to unload that player, right? You're building up their market value so that you really can't afford them. That's a tough position to be in.
Yeah, I never viewed it as tough, Bob, because I understood, first of all, one of the things we would tell our salespeople is you're never selling wins and losses. You're selling the name on the front of the jersey. You want people to be and have an emotional attachment to your franchise, knowing that your franchise will have players that come and players that will go. Interestingly enough, what you're talking about is also something that is not a real part of the game anymore. It used to be where players would play for one team their whole career, and that would be that. And so older people, the way we are older, although you look younger than I do.
Yeah.
The reality is that we're used to a world that younger people are not used to. They're used to players switching teams and being on different teams. Just look at the Red Sox. This offseason, they traded their World Series and League MVP Mookie Betts to the Los Angeles Dodgers because they realized that they would not be able to afford him. They didn't want to allocate the dollars that he thought he was going to get in free agency, so they moved on from him. And that's very, very common. But again, when you're dealing with emotionality, it's hard to convince fans of that.
So when you guys were, I think it was 2002, you're fourth in the East, 79-83. Then you signed Pudge Rodriguez, and then in 03 you get Jeff Conine, and your wild card 91-71. There was obviously a plan. We know we're going to invest in these ball players, like you said, for a period of time. But that must be the fun part, when you are investing and buying these players and knowing you're going to create all this excitement and the team's going to win. And we both know winning is a cure-all for so much.
Boy, I wish that I could tell you that I would revise history and tell you that we knew what we were doing. I think any front office or any GM or president who tells you that they knew exactly what they were doing, I don't think they're being very truthful with you. You put together the best team you can. And frankly, we thought our team in 05 was way better than the team we had in 03. And the team in 05 couldn't even make the playoffs. We thought the team we put together in 2012 would be better, and that team was the biggest disappointment of my career. So in 2003, you sort of did a Seinfeld yada yada. When you signed Pudge, people were thinking that that was really no help. Why bother? And when we traded for Conine, that was already on August 31st, when we were beginning to think about the playoffs and thinking that we really had a chance. And the key is to not deceive yourself thinking that you're worse than you are or better than you are. And that's another tough thing that baseball executives have to do. They can't read articles. They can't read the internet, the social media. They can't read anybody's opinions. They have to evaluate and not be delusional. And owners in general are delusional, thinking their team is better than it is. But you need to have good baseball people who really understand what you have going into a season. But then it's a game of adjustments. If you outperform your expectation, you add to that team and try to go for it. If you underperform what was your expectation, you sell off some players and reload for the next season.
So that 2003 season, magical, right? You bring McKeon in, and he comes in and leads the team, 75-49 record during his time, and you've got Juan Pierre, Pudge Rodriguez, Miguel Cabrera is a rookie, Dontrell Willis. When those guys, did you have a sense that with these rookies that they could be that great? These guys, they changed the whole face of your team.
So not many people know this, but Dontrell Willis was a throw-in in a trade we made with the Chicago Cubs. We asked for a player who could fog up a mirror because we wanted the optics of having another player in a deal we were doing back in 2002. And we knew he was a lefty, and anytime you can possibly get a lefty pitcher, you do it, but he was barely a prospect. He had a funky delivery. No idea that he would turn into Dontrell Willis. Any Marlins scout who tells you they traded for him because they knew who he'd be, I was there. I was a part of that trade. We had no idea what we were getting. Miguel Cabrera, on the other hand, was a very, very well thought of international sign. We knew he was going to be special, and we purposely waited till June of 2003 to call him up because that would enable us to keep him an extra year before becoming a free agent. We basically manipulated his service time, which is what owners get accused of all the time, and they deny it all the time, but we did it all the time. So
right.
I never deny that. Yes, we manipulated. We worked within the rules of baseball, and we would manipulate players. Service time means how many days you're on a big league team. And players want to be on a big league team as many days as possible because after 6 years of being on a big league team, you get to be a free agent. And that's the goal of every player.
So that postseason, was it one of those things where you're sort of pitching yourselves going, hey, we made the postseason, that's great, and then all of a sudden things just keep going along?
So I wish that I never made it back to the postseason, never won a second ring, and I wish I had, because the only thing better than winning the first, I would imagine, would be winning the second. And I would have enjoyed the second much more. I was so busy. We were trying to get a new ballpark at that time. There were hundreds and hundreds of ticket requests that we had to deal with. Family, friends, politicians, community leaders, none of whom had been on the Marlins bandwagon, none of whom had season tickets, all of whom wanted to go to postseason games. And for us, we knew we had the best record in the league since May. We thought we were the best team in baseball, but we were going to play San Francisco in the first round, and they had had the best record overall. They had Barry Bonds. And I'll never forget, we lost game one of that series, and I was outside the clubhouse at what was then called, I think, Pac Bell. I don't remember. They changed it.
Yeah.
Whatever it was called. The owner of the Giants came up to me, someone I had known then for 3 years. His name is Peter McGowan. He's now passed away. And he congratulated me on a great season and said I should be proud. And we were only down 1-0. Yeah. And I remember we won the next three. We beat the Giants. Peter McGowan came toward the clubhouse in Miami to congratulate me. And he looked at me and I said, Peter, I guess it wasn't over at 1-0. And he was despondent.
Well, and then it wasn't that the game, you had that game 4 collision, JT Snow and Pudge held onto the ball, and that ended the game. It was like, that was amazing.
If you look in the background of the video of that highlight, you'll see a 5'5", 130-pound guy wearing khakis and a short sleeve button-down brown shirt sitting in the front row next to the Marlins dugout. And when that play happened, and I will never forget this, because A, I was there because it was me, but B, it's in the highlights. I am jumping up and down like a child because it's so unreal, thinking to myself, my God, We're going to the league championship series. We're playing for the pennant, which to me was something that I could never have even dreamt, being the president of a team trying to win a pennant. But those were fun days.
And not just playing for the pennant, playing against the Cubs, right? Who are trying to get rid of this curse that goes back for nearly a century, over a century, and you're down 3-1 in a 7-game series. It's pretty much over.
So we had to face Carlos Zambrano, followed by Mark Pryor, followed by Kerry Wood, and we had to win all three against a team that had better pitching, a better team than we were. And another memory from Game 5, which was in Miami, is when you win the pennant, there's a man who has since passed away. His name is Bill Giles, was the owner of the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah.
Great man, very charitable. He was in our suite, the owner's suite in Miami during Game 5, rehearsing the speech that he would give on TV when the Cubs won, because it was so monumental for the Cubs to have broken this streak. It was the nationwide story. The dream, as you may recall that year, was the Cubs playing the Red Sox in the World Series.
Exactly.
Two teams that had never won. The Red Sox were in the LCS against the Yankees, and the Marlins were in against the Cubs. And so Bill Giles was rehearsing, and I went up to him when I saw what he was doing, and I politely, because I love him, and I was not rude or crazed the way some owners or some presidents can be. I merely said, if you're going to rehearse what seems to be inevitable, can we bring you to a office downstairs in our offices? Because I just didn't like the juju of that, right? It felt horribly. And lo and behold, 4 days later, Bill Giles was on stage giving us the trophy. God, did I love that.
I bet you did. Well, and so I'm assuming you were there for the Bartman game.
Of course. Except we didn't know it was the Bartman game at the time. We didn't know.
Not.
So we're sitting. So the Bartman story, before the 8th inning.
Yes.
I was in the clubhouse because I was now getting ready to address the team and to congratulate them on such a great season and having come this far. It was Game 6. Mike Redmond, who would later become a manager for me, who we would later fire, but he was a backup catcher. Great guy. He saw me in the clubhouse. He was getting coffee, and he said, "What the F are you doing?" I said, "I'm just getting my thoughts together. Man, everything's fine. You know, I'm good." And Red said, "Get your ass back to your seat. We can win this game." And this was before the 8th inning. So I put down the piece of paper that my notes that I'm making. I go sit down, and then the 8th inning happens, and there's a foul ball hit. And it was just a foul ball.
Right.
When you're in the stadium, you're watching the game, it was nothing but strike 2. That's all it was to the 40,000 people there. We did notice that there was some booing going on around where the play had happened. We noticed there was a little bit of commotion, but we're focused on the game. We didn't know anything about the insanity of the Bartman game until after the game, which is also, Bob, a little-known story. We went back to the clubhouse after we had the 8-run 8th and won that game to force a Game 7. And normally after you win a playoff game, there's music being played in the clubhouse. After every win, there's excitement, there's chatter, there's talking. Our clubhouse was silent because we had just witnessed something so improbable that no one had ever seen an 8-run 8th in a Game 6 of a playoff game in Chicago's Wrigley Field. We all got dressed. They got dressed. They got dressed. I sat in the manager's office, and we just sat there in silence. We got on the team bus, and we went back to the hotel and got ready for a Game 7 and a very bizarre post-game scene in our clubhouse.
Well, it's weird about baseball, too, because a lot of times you think momentum is so important, right? Yeah, but if you look back, you know, Carlton Fisk hits the home run with the Red Sox against Cincinnati, and then Cincinnati wins the series. So even though you guys pull that out, people are still thinking, well, the Cubs will win in 7.
They were favored very much to win in 7. They had Kerry Wood going against our Game 7 pitcher, a free agent acquisition that year, or a trade acquisition named Mark Redmond, who was a middle-of-rotation guy, great guy, still in touch with him to this day. But, boy, the Cubs were favored heavily in Game 7.
And so when you guys end up pulling that one out, and now you're going to the World Series, what was the reaction among you and your team? Because it's it's one thing to feel like you're favorites and if we don't win, it's disappointing. But you're playing with house money. Everything you do at this point is gravy.
We took great satisfaction in ruining MLB's plans to have the Cubs in the World Series. We took great satisfaction in how silent Wrigley was after Game 7. I hate to think about how happy I was to see people cry. We saw people in the stands crying, and it was such schadenfreude, right? I mean, I was so happy at the misfortune of those people, but I didn't care. And I just felt as though, wow, we're going to be in the World Series. And one of my first thoughts as we were spraying champagne without goggles back then, because that's how you're supposed to do it, your eyes burn. And I've never had champagne sprayed on me until we had clinched the wild card. So I never had that. The sting is real. The reason the players wear goggles, it hurts. But there was no goggle sponsorship. There was no thought of wearing goggles. But what's interesting is that one of the first thoughts I had in the winning clubhouse is that, my God, we have a manager and coaches who are going to manage the All-Star game next year.
That's what you're thinking.
That's a rule in baseball, that the World Series managers manage the All-Star game the following year. Why would that be in my head, where I'm already thinking about next year and the interesting marketing opportunities for having coaches in the World Series? I have no idea, but that's inside my brain.
So now you're playing the Yankees. And if you were underdogs to the Cubs, for sure you're underdogs to the Yankees. And Josh Beckett just has one of those magical Madison Bumgarner type series, right? Where he couldn't do anything wrong.
Well, actually, it was Game 6 that he was magical. He had got beaten up pretty good in his other start in the World Series. We didn't think that we would lose that World Series, actually.
Really?
Even though the Yankees did a lot of things. And it's funny, I'm doing a show with Joe Torre as part of my show, Nothing Personal.
Yes.
And normally I have no guests, I have no call-ins, but I do something called the Samson Sit Down. And I'm sitting down with Joe Torre, and we're going to talk about 2003 in that World Series, because the Yankees did things that make me laugh. Well, we were having batting practice. Normally what you do, being courteous to the road team, you play music while the other team is taking BP, and you let them sort of have their warm-up. The Yankees, during our BP before Game 1 of the World Series, no fans were allowed in yet. But what they did is they put videos on the Jumbotron at Yankee Stadium of all of their history, of all the World Series they had won, of all the great moments and all the Hall of Famers. And I remember talking to Juan Pierre and Jeff Conine and Jack McKeon and Larry Beinfest, our GM, and I said, wow, is this unreal what they're trying to do? The good news is half the people on our team didn't even know the Yankees ever won a World Series. Right. They were so oblivious to it that it didn't impact them. But Joe and his people tried to intimidate us, but it didn't work.
That is so funny. And you guys became the third wild card to win the series and to win a World Series. When you look back at that year, is that one of those years that you just treasure because of the outcome and the fact that so much happened that you didn't have a clue was going to happen?
I just look back that I'm lucky. Some people are in the game. First of all, Bob, I'm lucky that I ever had a chance to be the president of a baseball team. Let's start with that. That's something that barely anyone ever gets to do. Right. When I got fired by Derek Jeter in 2017, I was the second. By the way, there's no small irony that we beat Jeter in 2003, so he took great pleasure in firing me in 17. But I was the second longest tenured president in all of baseball when I was let go. And I think that it's so hard to win a ring. And because you need luck and you need good fortune, you need good players. And I look back at that year, it's just a year that it all went right. But the nature of sports is that you can win on a Tuesday, have the parade on a Thursday, and then you're in meetings Friday for next season already. Right. And it never stops. So I wish that I had taken the time at that moment to be more present. And it's a lesson I took with me later that actually was with me in 2006 when I did Ironman, Bob. The first time we ever met, I had learned, having been 3 years removed from a World Series, to try to be present. And I remember more about Ironman in Kona as the first ever team president to either start or finish, and the only active team president to this day to have ever done it. I was present every step of the way that day. So I have more memories of the '06 Ironman than I do of the '03 playoffs.
So for someone like a Derek Jeter, who I think didn't he fire you by text?
So I found out I got a text alert from a medium from it was released on whatever Bleacher Report or CBS or NBC or ABC. It was David Samson to be fired as president of the Marlins, and I got the text and I looked at it and I said I better call Derek. So I called Derek, and then he fired me.
So the hard part for someone like Derek Jeter, he comes from that legacy of the Yankees: win, 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 spend whatever it takes. Now being part of what you know is you build it, because you're small market, you win with whatever you can win with, and then you have to break it down and start over again. Is that can be difficult? It has been difficult for his legacy to have to try to do it a different way.
Oh, I think that you have a legacy as a player and a legacy as an owner. Look at Michael Jordan. His teams have been incredibly unsuccessful. Look at Isaiah Thomas as a coach, Larry Bird as a coach executive. It's very hard to have a Hall of Fame legacy as an owner and a player. And I think what Jeter realizes now is everything that he thought was so easy because you're playing the game. I never thought playing baseball was easy. I always respected what talent the players had. I'm not sure that many players respect the talent that's required to be an executive because they feel as though anyone could do it, and that's obviously subjective. I think Derek is learning a lot of tough lessons right now, and frankly, I'm happy he's learning them. Will it all work out in the end for him? That's a big wait to see. Right now, it's not. His whole MO, Bob, has been to do everything differently than I did it. Basically erase me from the history of the Marlins and any initiative I had. They went through and took down every picture of me that was around the stadium, and they were taken down and I assume put into a bonfire. And which is fine. I was never upset about any of that because I always viewed myself as being part of a relay race where I got the baton from the president before me. I gave the baton to Derek Jeter, the new president, and one day he'll give the baton to someone else. And what remains constant is the Marlins. But I think that Derek Jeter certainly has been humbled.
How hard was it to get a stadium built there?
Well, before you met me, I was 6'4". So it cost me almost a foot. It's the reason why stadiums don't get done in places like Tampa and Oakland is they don't have an executive who's willing to get hurt and be criticized and be the subject of scorn and hatred. It was not a popularity contest for me. And if it had been, I lost it. But my job I wasn't running for office. I continue to tell that to politicians and to community leaders, community influencers, to our employees, to our players, to our owner. I am not running for office. I don't need to win a popular vote, forgetting the electoral popular vote issue.
Yeah.
I don't need anybody's vote, except for there are 13 county commissioners, and I need 9 of them to approve a public-private partnership. And so I worked for years. We got there in 2002, and we finished the stadium deal agreements in 2009. It took 7 years of work to get the ballpark done.
Wow. And that opening day, being in that ballpark for the first time, knowing how much work you had put in, how special was that for you?
It was emotional. I walked around a lot opening day. It turns out that the first pitch strike by Josh Johnson to Rafael Furcal was the highlight of the game on the field. We ended up losing that game, which I regret. I wish that we didn't. I lost the first game of my career in Montreal to the Dodgers. I lost the last game of my career to the Braves. And I lost the first game in the new stadium to the Cardinals. 0 for 3 in those sort of games. Although, of course, I won the big one to get the ring. But you just walk around and look at people enjoying the stadium that you envisioned. You look at people sitting in their seat in row F, seat 12, in section 4, knowing that you were the one who came up with the sections, the rows, and the seat numbers. You were a part of every sign that says, concession stand this way. You were a part of that. And that's pretty powerful.
So you've also been, like you mentioned, you did Ironman, and you've become a committed endurance athlete. You did 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. When you look at the endurance side of your life, what are the events that stick out the most for you?
Well, It's funny because to me, I ran my first marathon in 1996, and I ran it on a bet because a friend told me and a friend that we couldn't run the New York Marathon. And this was March of 96. And we said, of course we can. We had run track in high school, but we said, yeah, we can. And we were probably drinking or smoking or doing whatever we were doing. We went to the reservoir in New York the next day, and we couldn't run a mile. Literally couldn't make it around the reservoir, which is 1.5, 1.6. We couldn't make it a mile without stopping. And we then trained and we finished the marathon November of 1996. And that started my love because I found a sport where anybody can do what I was doing, but so few people choose to do it.
Right,
Whereas in baseball, not everyone can hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Not everyone can throw 90 miles an hour. Not everyone can hit a golf ball, for par. Not everyone can dunk a basketball. But running and swimming and biking in endurance atmosphere, anyone can do it. It just takes discipline. And that day is when I got disciplined, and it culminated with the Ironman. But then I went up a notch, and that the 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents, called the World Marathon Challenge. There's under 200 people in the world who have ever done this. It is the most insane thing I've ever done. And it shows that your body is capable of so much more. And it's your mind that actually stops your body from accomplishing.
When you also brought with you on that trip Sarah Reinertsen, single above knee amputee, who a good friend and really the first challenge athletes to participate in trying to do 7 marathons, 7 days and 7 continents. Why bring Sarah, and what did you gain from that experience?
Well, I fell in love with Sarah the day I met her, and I met her through CAF. And we had this great relationship where we just got along and talked about doing events and seeing each other. And I called her one day. I said, Sarah, I got something for you. Sarah knew that I would do things for charity because I had done the Ironman and raised $250,000 for charity. I had asked her in 2012 to help me run 50 miles to honor the workers who had built Marlins Park. And I gave up to, I think, $600,000 total to charities, of which CAF was one. And Sarah ran 5 miles of that with me. And when I called her, I said, I got the next charity event. And she said, oh no, because she knows when I call her, it's going to be bad. I said, all right, here we go. Let's do 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. And I think her reaction was a dial tone. That is my recollection. I think she just hung up. And of course, we ended up talking and laughing. And I had her hello. She wanted to be a part of it. We raised money for CAF, over $100,000. We raised over $1 million doing that 777. We put a team of people. There were 16 of us who did it. We called ourselves Team Hold the Plane because we knew we were slow. So we'd need the organizer to hold the plane because we knew we had to get to the next continent, but he needed to wait for us. And we finished. Every one of us finished doing 7 and 7 and 7. And Sarah was an inspiration. I remember her in Antarctica, Marathon 1, with her blade trying to negotiate the ice. And then in Lisbon, I'll tell you Sarah's story that I don't know if she's told you, Bob. I've never seen Sarah lose her temper before. She is the nicest, greatest, calmest woman. We were in Lisbon day 5, continent 5, marathon 5. The course was on cobblestones and it was raining. And her blade was slipping. She lost it on the race director in a way that I had never seen her lose her temper before. And what's amazing when you're taxing your mind and your body by doing 7 and 7 and 7 is everyone on our team had a moment during that 7-day period where we just lost our composure. Something snapped and we had a disproportionate response to something around us. We had a teammate who wouldn't get off the plane in Cartagena. He just said, I'm done. I am not continuing. I'll see you when you're back on the plane. And he sat in his seat with his seatbelt on while the rest of us were getting off the plane. And he just needed a minute, right? And everyone had a moment like that. And we just all looked at Sarah and said, okay, no one talk to Sarah right now. All right, just stay away. Give her some space. We'll hug her later. She's having her moment. but she did it, and that was something, Bob.
So when I see baseball now, and I, as a guy who loves the sport as much as you do, watching the owners and the players battle right now, when they could be in the forefront, right? They could be playing while the rest of the world isn't playing, and they could be generating all this positivity towards the sport of baseball. How frustrating is it for you to see what's happening? And what would your suggestion be for both the players and the owners? Because somebody has to meet in the center and understand the greater good here.
Well, by definition, what you just said, someone has to meet in the center. By definition, both would meet in the center. That's how an agreement would happen, right?
Yes, yes.
So I'm not frustrated at all because I've been in the room negotiating. I know what collective bargaining negotiations are, and this is happening exactly according to plan. July 4th was never going to be the date that baseball was going to come back. The biggest mistake baseball made was not making that clear to its fans, because all the fans believed, hey, we can be playing Independence Day. How great will that be? Oh, say, can you see? Play ball. It's perfect. But that was never going to happen. There are no team sports playing by July 4th in cities across the country. And baseball just was unwilling to acknowledge that fact. And now it's too late for baseball to start July 4th. So people are disappointed. But from an insider's perspective, it was never realistic. What I'm frustrated about is that the players and the owners are both playing from the same bargaining playbook that's used every time there is a negotiation between management and union. And my view is we're in a different time period right now with the pandemic, with the economy where it is, with the murder of George Floyd. There's so many things going on that I believe that the owners and the players should have gotten together and been a united front as an outward-facing body, as a sport, saying, listen, we do not have agreement as to how this season should be played. We believe X, we believe Y, owners and players. But given where we are playing, and we are starting as soon as we can, which is not going to be till mid to end of July at best, by the way, because of health concerns. But we will then negotiate and take care of this later. We have put a pin in our arguing, but there will be discussions, and they're going to be painful, but we're not going to have them right now.
So I look at our teeny little sport of triathlon, and I look at there's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity now with big sports not happening to create more buzz around these smaller sports and the athletes. As a guy who's been an executive, obviously at the highest level with major sport, if you were running a sport like triathlon or a sport like running right now, what would your suggestions be for those sports in terms of try to become more integral to the national consciousness?
So it's interesting you asked that, because I've been thinking a lot about this, and I would have been pumping marketing dollars on social media when the quarantine first started. And I would have had online videos that people were working out, as you recall, when it first started, working out like fiends. They were drinking a lot, but also working out a lot in their homes on videos on their computers. And I would have had a schedule of races that were for beginners, beginner triathlons, not Ironman. Because when you talk to a normal person, Bob, just so you know, to this day, when I say a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and a 26.2 mile run,
gibberish. Yeah,
it's gibberish. They can't even picture it.
No.
And so you can't sell that. A sprint triathlon is easier to manage. People can comprehend. All right, so I have to work my way to run a 5K. All right, I got to bike 10 or 12 miles. Well, I do that on the weekends with my kids sometimes. Wait, do I have to spend a lot of money to buy new equipment? No, you can take your normal weekend bike and you're fine. You don't have to practice too much in a pool because it's not a very long swim. It's 20 minutes. You can do breaststroke, you can do side stroke, you can do backstroke, and you don't have to run fast. You can walk 3 miles. I think the opportunity that triathlon needs to do is it's sort of like feeding baseball fans and getting them into what we used to call the cone of fandom, basically.
Right.
Where at the end of the cone are the people doing the Ironman. At the end of the cone in baseball are the people who go to 80 games.
Right.
Those are just the extreme. Very few people do it. The bottom of the cone in baseball are people who have an awareness that there was actually a game being played. They didn't go. They didn't watch it. They don't know the score. But if you ask them, they say, yeah, I think the Marlins had a game tonight. Then you get them to the next step, which is, yes, they played tonight. Did they win or did they lose? And you work them up to knowing the score, then to actually watching a few minutes of a game, to going to a game, then to going to 5 games, then to buying season tickets. I think triathlon needs to do the same thing. Get people in at the bottom. We're having these events which are socially distanced. Maybe it's all around communities where it's for 50 people or 75 people, where they can come and just experience for a moment just crossing a finish line. Because that rush of adrenaline, when you cross the finish line, not winning a race, just crossing it, that changes something inside the brain chemistry, and it's like you want more. And that's, to me, what triathlon needs: more people to cross easier to achieve finish lines.
You know what's so funny is one of my big pushes for years has been the pool triathlon. Starts with a 5K run, 10-mile bike ride, and then 150-yard swim in a pool. The swim is the biggest deterrent for people doing triathlon, because, you know, you and I go for a run together, we get tired, you know, we can walk. We go for a bike ride together, we get tired, we can walk. We go for a swim together out in the ocean, we get tired, we die. That's a problem, right? So you start adding the serpentine swim, where you start at one end and you do 3 long 50-meter lengths, and all of a sudden people are triathletes and they're like, oh my God, this is great. I didn't know I could get across the finish line. To me, that's exactly what we should. And also, when we talk about demographics, when you start doing these races, all of a sudden they're 50% women, sometimes 60% women. You've got different socioeconomic groups who are coming out and doing it because they're cheaper. You can take a bike that's been in the garage for the last 20 years. So I'm exactly on the same page. I think that now is the time to push the fountain of youth that is the sport of triathlon.
Because, Bob, before, I don't know, I know that Ironman, the World Championship, has been postponed to the early part of 21, I believe.
Yeah, till February, yeah.
And I'm thinking about the Boston Marathon, which was canceled. The New York Marathon has not been, but I can't imagine the New York Marathon is going to happen.
Right.
I don't think any large races are going to happen all through 20. And This would have been an opportunity. I wish triathlon, and I thought about this a lot, and it's not too late, but it's we're already getting to the point where it's getting too late. But this is the opportunity through 2020 where there are small races going on. I'm training right now for my next endurance event. I did the 50-mile Antelope Canyon Ultra last March, which was brutal, horribly difficult. Yeah. Now I'm training for a 100-miler, which is going to happen in December. It's the Daytona 100. I've never done 100. I want to. You start in Jacksonville, Florida. You end up in Daytona. It's on the road, no sand, at least compared to Antelope Canyon. And so I'm training, and the reality is that race will go on because it's so small. Yep. And they can stagger people's start times. You really don't have a lot of aid stations, and when you do, they're sort of empty. You have to sort of bring your own stuff. And triathlon, it can be that way.
It was that way.
People are scared because I have to buy a bike. What are those, like $3,000? I can't afford one of those bikes where I put my head down. I don't have a helmet that has aerodynamic qualities that I see. You don't need that equipment to do a triathlon.
I love it. David, such a pleasure to catch up. And for people to subscribe to your show, what do they do?
Thank you. It's called Nothing Personal with David Samson. There's a YouTube channel where if you search it, you can find it. It's a video show and an audio show. It's wherever you find your podcast, called Nothing Personal. And you can follow me on Twitter at David P. Samson. And Bob, it is always fun to see you.
You are the best, David. Thanks again for all the support of Challenge Athletes Foundation over the years. You've been just an amazing supporter.
Thank you, Bob.
David Samson has been our guest again. Breakfast with Bob. We are brought to you by the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix, Normatec, Form Goggles, UCAN, our Challenge Athletes Foundation, where we just sent out 3,921 grants, totaling $5.9 million to athletes in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, 43 countries in 103 different sports. Who even knew there were 103 different sports? David Samson has been our guest. David, you are the best. Thank you, sir.